Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's important that we are ready to welcome anybody who comes to beat the heat.
Trying to stay cool. Parts of BC bake under some sweltering temperatures, prompting plenty of warnings and calls to stay safe.
Sunglasses, hats, sunscreen.
Plus, searchers recover 3 bodies near where a trio of mountain climbers went missing near Squamish more than a month ago. And
it's also an example of wasting taxpayers' dollars.
BC spends millions to get cancer patients treated in the U.S.
The reason we're in Bellingham is to ensure that people are protected in the meantime.
The push for treatment across the border as BC tries to build more at home.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Mother Nature has turned up the heat throughout our province, with parts of the Fraser Valley seeing temperatures of 30 degrees plus. And it's only set to get warmer. A heat warning is now in effect for Abbotsford, Chilliwack, and the rest of the valley. As Belpuri reports, keeping cool is not easy, especially for those most vulnerable.
Traditional ways to keep cool are always popular. When it's 32 degrees and not even noon, it's hard to beat the heat. Residential air conditioning is in high demand.
So I've already been to 5 places today, and I can go to another dozen if I want to, but that just depends on how much energy I have left in me, to be honest, right? This equipment is all sold.
If you call for a system today, the wait is likely 3 to 4 weeks. In recent years, the need to respond to extreme heat has grown significantly in Abbotsford and across the Fraser Valley.
We are seeing increased times of mid-30 temperatures extending for many days.
Nonprofit organizations are focused on people who are homeless or live in marginal accommodations.
Sunglasses, hats, sunscreen, aftercare products like aloe vera. We provide waters and tools for people to rehydrate themselves.
The primary goal is to keep people safe from heat stroke or exhaustion and out of hospital. Abbotsford and the Fraser Valley usually deal with temperatures affected by wind moving from the mountains out to the sea. But until this heat wave, it was the other way around, and that kept temperatures fairly comfortable until this weekend. Relief is predicted by midweek.
Tuesday night, we'll see the temperatures really be right close to threshold again. And then by Wednesday, they would need to reach up to 33 degrees in order to keep the heat warning valid. But they are projected to only reach about 30 degrees.
Some say they are already feeling that change.
It seems a bit cooler than yesterday, yeah. We've got a bit of cloud cover today, and there's a bit more of a breeze, I think, today.
Designated cooling centers like public libraries are available throughout the Fraser Valley.
What we're seeing today is more people coming. I'm seeing some seniors joining us, sitting in our reading lounge today, for example. There are families coming in.
Until midweek, Abbotsford will bake with temperatures well above normal. Belpuri, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Those hot temperatures stretch across our province. And with that, health warnings and a rising wildfire risk. Our Michelle Gasub is tracking the heat and joins us now with more. Michelle, what are you watching for right now?
Dan, more than 40 heat warnings have been issued right across BC, with 20 daily heat records broken Sunday right across this province. Ashcroft was the hottest place in Canada today, hitting 40.3 degrees Celsius. Lytton, of course, known as BC's hotspot, hit 39.9 degrees. That broke a daily record. One of the other places that saw uncomfortably high temperatures was Prince George. It hit 34 degrees today. People living there tell us they're looking for ways to beat that heat.
We got a library day planned because it's nice and cool in there, do story time with the kids, and then, yeah, lots of park dates.
And Dan, we are not done with this heat yet. Across the interior, we could see temperatures into the 40s through the week. And with that kind of heat across that region, we know the wildfire risk does increase, so we'll be keeping an eye on the conditions there.
Michelle, we're certainly feeling those temperatures here on the coast as well. What about the island? What's happening there?
Yeah, the island has not been spared. BC Ferries actually set up misting stations so passengers can cool down. Anyone who has waited in a ferry lineup in the summers knows just how hot it can get. So we were hearing stories of people actually heading down to the water, trying to cool down as best they could. And in terms of how to get some relief, well, people in Nanaimo have some tips.
We got a pool, like a little blow-up pool at home, so kind of stay in that as much as possible, or typically go somewhere that might have AC.
Daddy, remember our pool always pops.
Somebody should be hauling water and sandwiches to the homeless for sure. There's 1,000 in Nanaimo. Plus.
Yeah, I just feel sorry for the ones that don't have a resource.
Hanging out at the beach, lots of water, sunscreen, no fugazi. Yep.
Eat ice cream. Can you say it loud? Say eat ice cream. What do you like to do? It's awesome.
There we are. Michelle, thanks very much.
Dan.
Meanwhile, hot and sunny weather mixed with local emissions means an air quality advisory has now been issued for Metro Vancouver. Ground level smog is expected to linger for a few days. And for anyone organizing outdoor activities, especially for kids and older adults, plan accordingly.
Ozone tends to be the highest when it's hottest and sunniest, so the early to late afternoon period. So we ask that folks postpone activities to later this evening or early in the morning if they really do need to be outside.
And conditions in the northeast part of our province have spiked, with Fort St. John seeing dangerous conditions due to wildfire smoke. The severe risk there is expected to last a few days, but with hot and warm temperatures and no sign of rain, that danger could continue. Darius Madavi joins us now with the forecast. Darius, how long is this heat going to stick around?
Well, we still got a while of it, Dan, especially here in southern BC, where temperatures are expected to stay well above seasonal right through the end of this week. Coming down a little bit as we get into the end Thursday, Friday, but not much. We're going to still see temperatures into the mid to high 30s in parts of the interior, so people should settle in for a long, hot and sunny stretch. And of course, that has many implications. As we heard, air quality advisories are going to become more common. For instance, Fort St. John, because of that wildfire smoke, saw worse air quality than places like Shanghai, Beijing, and Delhi. We're talking some really serious stuff. And we'll be talking more about that later in the show. For now, take a look at this. This is the ridge of high pressure that we still have sitting over the province. And as you can see, for the south, not going away anytime soon, even though some precipitation may break into the northwest. If we move on to look at our warnings across the Western Canada, you can see lots of heat warnings in place. Underneath those heat warnings, you can't quite see them, but air quality advisories for some areas, like again in the northeast, parts of Alberta, even here in Metro Vancouver, not because of wildfire smoke, but still a byproduct of that ridge of high pressure, at least partially. And then if we take a look at the highs that we're expecting over the next few days, again, you'll notice we hit our peak tomorrow in many places, but temperatures don't come down that much. I mean, dropping from 39 in Kamloops on Wednesday to 37 on Thursday isn't going to make that much of a difference. So it is going to be, even though you might hear that the heat wave is mostly ending as we get into the end of this week, know that that doesn't mean that we're out of the risk zone. Please continue to check in on people who are vulnerable and know the risks that come along with heat. I just want to leave you with a quick graphic that shows the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Both very dangerous, but the more that you know about each of these different problems, the more you can help people that are experiencing them. So, Dan, we'll talk more later in the show. Fire danger, drought, lots to talk about, but for now, I'll leave you with that.
Okay. Darius, thanks very much. Police say 4 people have been killed in a crash in the West Kootenay on Friday. It happened on Highway 6 just north of Hills, BC, close to Nakusp. The RCMP says a semi flipped and lost its load as the driver tried to avoid a passenger truck that reportedly crossed the center line. The semi's 45-ton load of timber then scattered on that highway, hitting the truck and killing all 4 people inside. Mounties say the victims are from Nelson. The driver of the semi was taken to hospital and has minor injuries. Highway 6 was closed for 11 hours after that crash. Mounties in Squamish say 3 bodies have now been recovered from an area where 3 hikers went missing just over a month ago. The RCMP says the three were removed today from near Atwell Peak in Garibaldi Provincial Park. Squamish Search and Rescue says it worked with police to carry out that recovery. Mounties say they are in touch with the families and the victims' names will not be released. Officials say the climbers were last seen at the end of May. Rescue teams tried to find them, but unstable conditions and very challenging weather forced them to pause in June. The coroner is now in charge of that case. The BC government is now sharing how much it's costing you, taxpayers, to send cancer patients to the U.S. for treatment. British Columbia has among the highest wait times for radiation therapy in Canada. As Katie DeRosa reports, it sparked yet another debate about the role of private health care.
The price tag to send cancer patients to Bellingham, Washington for radiation therapy has hit $16 million so far. Of that, $13 million has gone to 2 private American cancer clinics, which have treated just over 600 British Columbians in the last year.
This is not only, to me, hypocritical, it's also an example of wasting taxpayers' dollars.
Vancouver Dr. Brian Day spent years fighting the BC government in court over private health care. He runs the private Cambie Surgery Centre, which was at the center of a 14-year-long legal battle over whether patients should be able to pay for services covered by BC's medical services plan.
They basically spent tens of millions of dollars opposing private options in Canada, and yet are supporting private options in the United States. This makes no sense.
A spokesman for Canadian Doctors for Medicare says while he's glad patients are getting speedier access to cancer care, BC should not be relying on the U.S. to do that.
I think it's a tragedy that in a country as wealthy as ours, that we're not able to provide care to our patients in our own country.
But Mitchell claims the private system Day was advocating for through the court challenge would not help everyday British Columbians get better care.
The Supreme Court of British Columbia found that the system that he was proposing would lead to a system where ability to access care was contingent on ability to pay. And these patients that are going to Bellingham are receiving their care free of charge. They are receiving it funded by the public system.
Health Minister Adrian Dix stressed the Bellingham program is a temporary measure over the next 2 years while the province builds 4 new cancer centres in Surrey, Kamloops, Burnaby and Nanaimo.
The reason we're in Bellingham is to ensure that people are protected in the meantime.
Dr. Claudine Stornis-Bliss, a doctor at Surrey Memorial Hospital and BC United candidate for Surrey Cloverdale, says if her party forms government in the fall election, it would increase the use of private medical clinics to deliver publicly funded health care. She claims the NDP's refusal to do so puts patients at risk.
They are putting ideologies ahead of patients. They are already using private clinics, both in BC and in Washington State. They are just not using it to its full capacity.
While there are signs the wait to see an oncologist in BC is getting shorter, the province continues to have one of the longest waits in the country for radiation treatment. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
We have an update now on the Tori Dunn killing. She's the young woman who was found dead inside her home in Surrey 3 weeks ago. The man now accused in her murder is also accused of a violent crime that happened just a few weeks before. And court documents reveal he has an extensive criminal record. Tori's family believes she would still be alive if that suspect had been held in jail for previous charges. Now they're starting a petition calling for stricter bail laws in Canada.
It's too late for my daughter right now. Unfortunately, and but it's maybe save somebody else's child or daughter or niece or wife or whatever. You know, it's things have to change. This is a crime that didn't need to happen. It should never have happened. Nonetheless, my daughter's not with us anymore.
CBC News has asked BC's Attorney General for a response on the family's petition. We have not yet heard back. The redevelopment of Burnaby Hospital is moving forward as Fraser Health and the Provincial Health Services Authority chose a construction team.
You're seeing really the wrapping up over the next 6 to 8 months of phase 1, this extraordinary project in Burnaby to transform this hospital from a hospital that has outstanding staff that serves the community to a modern hospital that will serve the people of Burnaby for decades to come.
The second phase of the project will include building an acute care tower. It will be home to a new cancer center along with rooms for general medicine as well as other departments. Construction is expected to start late next year and be ready for patients in 2030. At the same time, though, 4 BC interior hospitals closed their emergency departments this weekend because of a lack of staff. 3 have since reopened, but the emergency department at Nicola Valley Hospital in Merritt will stay closed until 8 a.m. Tuesday. Patients are being asked to go to other hospitals some hours away by car.
It doubles the distance for a lot of people who are living on the fringes of those communities. People within those communities are not going to have the highest level of care that they need for a specific condition.
It's the latest in a years-long string of emergency department closures in rural BC because of staffing shortages. Last year, Nicola Valley Hospital had more than 10 emergency room closures alone, while in 2022, ERs at 13 rural BC hospitals were closed for about 4 months combined. And just this afternoon, Interior Health announced it has closed the emergency department at Helmkin Memorial Hospital in Clearwater from now until 7 a.m. tomorrow because of a nursing shortage. If you drink almond, oat, coconut, or other kinds of beverages, listen up. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has issued a sweeping recall alert for a variety of plant-based refrigerated drinks. It says 18 varieties of silk and good value beverages may be contaminated with listeria. The agency says contaminated food may not look or smell spoiled, but it can still make you sick. You can find a full list of the recalled products on the Health Canada website. Well, BC's jobless rate continues to hover around 5%. Some groups are finding it harder to find work. Michelle Morton has more on the struggle to get employment that will pay those rising monthly bills.
At Edmonds Station, Amir Hidari is on his way to catch the bus to go to a job interview.
I already have like one job right now at the moment, but the thing is the expenses is getting higher and higher like every month.
But he says the job hunt has not been easy.
I applied like online for so many jobs, like in different cases, construction, restaurant. I applied for like different jobs for like a month or 2 months, and I didn't get any answer.
Hidari is not the only person finding it difficult to find work. An analyst with Statistics Canada says among Black and South Asian Canadians, the unemployment rate increased at a faster rate than it did for the overall population.
A lot of it is related to immigration. We know that those two groups have more recent immigrants than, some other groups. And those people sometimes face barriers such as not having their educational attainment, recognized in the same way. They may also have less work experience in Canada.
He says for Black Canadians between the ages of 25 and 54, last month the unemployment rate went up by 4.4 percentage points from the same time last year. For South Asian Canadians, the rate rose by 1.7 percentage points. As for how BC compares to the national average, Fields says the unemployment rate for Black residents is slightly higher, but double compared to last year. For South Asian residents, the rate has stayed steady.
One challenge of finding work is some people experience a language barrier.
What kind of job are you trying to get right now?
Caregiving. I've applied even for law jobs, but I haven't gotten any.
Do you have experience in those fields?
Yeah, I do.
To find a job, it's really difficult. I didn't have any experience at first. Yeah. So in any particular section. So yeah, that's make that difficult.
That desire for experience, a big reason Hidari says he's often rejected.
They always mention that I don't have that much experience, and they need somebody who has experience and know how to finish the job.
The province says in a statement in part, it supports BIPOC workers through various programs through Work BC and will continue to closely monitor changes to unemployment and work with partners as needed. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Pro-Palestinian protesters have now decamped from UBC's Point Grey campus. Students have been protesting the Israel-Hamas war since late April and said that last week they remained committed to pressuring schools to end financial and academic ties with Israeli companies and institutions. For its part, UBC says it remains committed to respectful dialogue with student protesters. Metro Vancouver's population is set to rise in a big way in the next quarter century. A new regional planning document shows more than 1.4 more million people moving to the region by 2050. But as Rob Easton explains, that will come with growing pains.
Metro Vancouver, home to nearly 2.8 million people in the 2021 census. And by 2050, 4.2 million people. That is, if the regional district's population projections hold true. It's all in a new report that's updated how the region calculates population growth.
Immigration is, way higher than before. So historically, we usually had around 37,500 immigrants annually. Now, with new immigration level targets in first few years, it will be such a huge increase to 55.
The increase amounts to a 47% spike in the number of people arriving every year. And last year, a record number of immigrants came to Canada, made up of permanent residents and a huge proportion of temporary residents like students and foreign workers.
This gives us an understanding of how many, but still the details of how we're going to pay for it still have to be, I think, determined. How we're going to pay for it, when and where we're going to build it.
The report doesn't advise governments what to do next, but it provides a model for planning so we can estimate the demand for things like housing, infrastructure, utilities, and public transportation. But many of these sectors are already under strain. TransLink says it needs a new sustainable funding model to meet the needs of a growing population. BC Hydro says it's seeing historic system use and is looking for new sources of electricity. And housing affordability has long been a concern.
We have a significant task ahead of us, which is to build the amount of housing that we need in our communities. We are not going to be able to meet the test of how much housing we need without transit-oriented development, without the small-scale multi-unit legislation that we passed.
Experts say there is an upside, though, the potential for new labor, ideas, and aspirations.
And it's in that uncertain future that it goes down to leadership. And I think the biggest challenges is on a local level, but then also at a provincial level and a federal level, that we have a set of leaders which I think make us not, afraid of our future, but ready to embrace it.
Now, just 25 years to see how it turns out. Rob Easton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A daughter of the late Canadian writer Alice Munro is telling her, my apologies, that's the wrong story. We'll get to that in just a moment. A BC NDP stalwart and former cabinet minister has died. Bob Williams was 91.
The message is that we care about this province and we think it can be run a different way in terms of serving the people rather than just a few interests.
Williams served in BC's first NDP government under Premier Dave Burritt from 1972 to 75. He's credited with helping build ICBC, the Agricultural Land Reserve, Robson Square, as well as Whistler Town Centre. Before provincial politics, he was a planner in Delta and served on Vancouver City Council. Premier David Eby calls Williams a giant who helped shape the province from BC Housing to Surrey Central and the C-Bus. Williams' Facebook page says he died on Sunday at St. Paul's Hospital after a long illness. A public memorial is set for about 2 months from now. Coming up, how to stay cool in the heat. Who is most at risk? And what can be done to stay cool on one of those hot summer nights? Our doctor is in. With heat records breaking across our province, we thought it's time to talk about the risks that come with that rising heat. Joining us is our regular medical columnist, Dr. Melissa Lem. Nice to see you again. First of all, remind us who is most susceptible to heat and why?
Anyone whose nervous system doesn't respond to the effects of heat as effectively is most susceptible. So this includes groups like babies, young children, elderly people, and also people with chronic diseases, especially if they're taking medication like diuretics or psychiatric medications that impair their response to heat. And then also people who don't have as much control over their environments, like people who are unhoused, people who have to exercise or work outdoors, and also people who don't have access to indoor cooling. And that includes about 50% of people across BC right now.
So for those who are outside or with a loved one, what are those signs that they should watch out for, and in themselves?
Well, there's so many different illnesses that heat can cause, anywhere from mild conditions like heat rash to more severe things like triggering a heart attack, or more directly related to heat stroke. And we know that heat stroke can cause issues like nausea, dizziness, and hot flushed skin, but the red flag sign you have to watch out for is changes in level of consciousness, so unconsciousness or confusion. This should be a sign that you have to get them to medical attention immediately, call 911, cool them down right away. And there are things that we can do as well to prevent heat strokes. Or, for example, drinking lots of fluids, avoiding alcohol and caffeine because that can dehydrate you, avoiding really salty food too because that can worsen swelling, and then spending time in cool areas, cooling centers during the daytime, and then also accessing the provincial government's expanded free air conditioning program or rebates for electric heat pumps if you qualify.
Now, those options are great for people who are able to get out and perhaps to a cooling center or to a library during the day. What about at night when we know, if people don't have air conditioning or a breeze and it still can stay that hot and it's hard to sleep?
Well, this is when a lot of the problems happen, when our bodies don't get a break overnight from that marathon that we're running during the day of trying to keep our bodies cool. And so you have to remember airflow and water are ways that you can stay cool. So for example, wearing wet clothing, misting yourself, running those electric fans, taking a cool shower or bath, and then also sometimes even wrapping ice in a towel and putting that on your body. These are all things that can make a difference.
We are not in a heat dome. Certainly we saw the horrific effects of that in 2021, more than 600 people killed by that. As much as you'd like to share, how did that, really a disaster, change how you practice medicine?
Well, I think this affected a lot of us as health professionals, and many of us are still dealing with the mental health effects, for example, of what we saw. This was the worst weather-related mass casualty event in Canadian history. And I remember seeing more patients with heat illness than I ever had in my entire career. And I spoke with colleagues in the ER who said that these were the worst shifts of their careers. They were literally running from room to room, intubating patients, having seizures and unconscious from heat stroke. And I think for me, this really brought home this idea that 80% of our health status comes from factors outside our healthcare system, like, for example, climate change that made the heat dome 150 times more likely. So it made me do two things in my practice. One is make sure that my own patients are more prepared for the effects of extreme heat, and then two, really commit to advocating for healthy public policy that makes sure that we're counteracting climate change, because arguably that will have an even bigger impact on my patients' health than what I do in the office.
Dr. Melissa Lem, we always appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
France's government is in limbo after the country's election sees leftist gains and the far right slide, along with a hung parliament. More on that next. A daughter of the late Canadian writer Alice Munro is now telling her own story. Andrea Robin Skinner has written about being sexually abused as a child by Munro's second husband and about the pain of keeping that a family secret for decades. Lisa Shing has details.
I had told most of my family about the abuse.
A family secret kept in the dark for decades, brought into the light.
No action was taken to protect me, and I was sent back to my stepfather's house.
Andrea Robin Skinner, the youngest daughter of revered Canadian author Alice Munro, in a documentary produced by her sister, largely unnoticed until now. In an essay in the Toronto Star, Skinner revealed the sexual abuse she experienced at the age of 9 by her stepfather, Munro's second husband, Gerald Fremlin. She detailed the deep hurt she felt after telling her mother what happened in a letter years later, saying Munro chose to support her husband instead. Skinner wrote she was adamant that whatever had happened was between me and my stepfather. It had nothing to do with her. Munro died in May, so we don't know the reason for that reaction.
Childhood sexual abuse is so often hidden and silenced.
This researcher says that silence is common, especially within families. It continued with the Munros, even after Skinner went to police and Fremlin was convicted of indecent assault in 2005. She was estranged from her family for years.
People have trouble believing that the other people that are close to them have been deceiving them.
Skinner and her siblings reconciled years later through the Gatehouse, an organization supporting survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
It's compounded when the persons that we're talking about are in the public eye, because we look upon people as celebrities and we want them to have a perfect life.
In writing, you do use your own feelings.
In literary circles, reconciling Skinner's revelation with Alice Munro's position as a literary icon, the master of the short story and Nobel Prize winner, comes with mixed feelings.
It is, for all her readers, a deep, deep betrayal.
I think the wisest thing to do is to recognize that the place from which she wrote.
Their healing journeys.
That's Skinner's hope, letting her own story be a part of her mother's narrative and legacy. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
To France now, where people have woken up to a new political reality. The national election awarded the most seats to a coalition of left-leaning parties, but no single one won a majority. And as Margaret Evans reports, that settles the centrist president with a divided assembly.
All eyes on the French National Assembly as France tries to decipher what kind of government Sunday's election results might produce. Those who won seats, no exception. It's not the culture of France to build coalitions, says Sylvain Maillard, a newly elected MP from President Emmanuel Macron's centrist bloc. So it will probably take several weeks, he says. Last night, the French left celebrated their first-place finish, ahead of Macron's bloc and the far-right National Rally, relegated to third place after centrists and leftists agreed to vote strategically against it. After the party, though, comes the hangover.
Nobody in the present National Assembly has a majority, so it will have to search for a consensus figure.
The president of the National Rally insists their victory has been but delayed. Those who fear the ascent of the far right say a political vacuum makes that possibility all the more likely. In the often downtrodden French suburbs, the country's motto of liberty, equality, and fraternity can be harder to come by, especially for minorities. Badre Lemrabe, an AI expert and brother-in-law of the bride, supports the left. But he also says its neglect has helped fuel the national rally. They abandoned the working class vote in recent years, he says, and rural areas. That's why we've seen them move massively towards the far right. It's a message he doesn't want politicians who united to keep them from power to forget. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Paris.
Russia has launched a new wave of attacks on Ukraine. As Chris Brown reports, the daylight onslaught hit civilian targets in 5 cities, including a children's hospital in the capital, Kyiv. And a warning for you, some of the images in this story may be very disturbing to some viewers.
The missile that obliterated the Okhmadi Children's Hospital, one of Kyiv's largest, appeared to be one of Russia's most advanced hypersonic weapons, and its results were catastrophic. We got here 5 minutes before it happened and found the pediatric ward, but it's a nightmare, said Tatiana. Rescuers said they could hear children screaming under the rubble. Bloodied staff formed up human chains to remove debris and deliver drinking water. No words, even swear words, can describe this, said Vladimir Kravchenko. Ukraine's emergency service posted video from a bloodied ward. Teenagers took to social media to share their injuries. And parents of children with cancer took their IVs outside and continued with their life-saving treatment as the emergency unfolded around them. President Vladimir Zelensky was in Warsaw when it happened. He said Russia fired 38 missiles in one of the largest attacks of the war, and while most were shot down, some found their targets. Beyond any doubt, we're going to answer these savages from Russia, he said. Russia's barrage also killed people in other parts of the capital, demolishing a building Andrei Lashinsky owned. It's a meat grinder inside, without any windows or doors, he said. Russia has often timed its most destructive onslaughts to coincide with NATO meetings. And with another gathering this week, the not-so-subtle message may be that Russia remains powerful and NATO can't stop it. Russia's military implausibly claimed that Ukraine is responsible for the damage and the deaths, that they were caused by missile defenses. Vladimir Putin's regime is already being investigated for multiple war crimes against the people of Ukraine, and Ukrainian prosecutors say this is another. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
The problems keep growing at Boeing. The Federal Aviation Administration in the U.S. has announced mandatory inspections of 2,600 737 jets because passenger oxygen masks could fail during an emergency. And as Paula Johacek explains, this comes as the company agrees to plead guilty and pay a fine for a fraud charge stemming from the 2 deadly crashes of 737 MAX jetliners.
5 years after the Ethiopian Airlines crash that killed his daughter, Chris Moore is still mourning.
Our family is shattered. We are still stuck in 2019.
Boeing will plead guilty to a criminal fraud charge stemming from that crash and from another one 5 months earlier in Indonesia. A total of 346 people died. A 2021 fraud charge alleged the company misled regulators about flight control software used in its new 737 MAX 8 planes and about how much training pilots needed to use it safely. Boeing struck a deal to avoid criminal prosecution, but failed to follow its terms. That led to this plea deal. If a judge accepts it, Boeing will pay a $243 million fine, invest at least $455 million in its compliance programs, and get oversight from an independent monitor.
This is a drop in the bucket. This is something they can easily afford.
This corporate governance expert says the plea deal is a way for Boeing to avoid the legal cost and reputational damage of a long trial.
Although they don't seem to have any problem creating their own reputational damage, on an ongoing basis recently.
One example of that this January, a door plug that blew off an Alaska Airlines flight. The U.S. Justice Department says this plea deal is for the 2 crashes and doesn't give Boeing immunity for recent incidents. The guilty plea will be entered in U.S. District Court sometime this month, but Chris Moore says he wants the judge to reject it and order a criminal trial.
That is the only way that all the facts can be put on the table.
In a statement, Boeing confirmed to CBC News it had reached an agreement, but would not provide further details. Paula Duhacek, CBC News, Calgary.
It's not just Canada feeling the heat. After the break, a look south of the border where dangerous temperatures are still rising. It is not just BC and Western Canada feeling the summer heat right now. South of the border, 36 million people are under excessive heat warnings. As Susan Ormiston shows us, already dangerous temperatures there are still rising.
1, 2, 3.
A curious fascination posing to mark record-breaking heat.
You know, how many people in the world can say they've been to the hottest place in the world? It's almost like climbing Mount Everest.
Death Valley in California, aptly named,
131.
broke through 100 years of heat, notching above 55 degrees.
I just thought it was so cool. I had to bring my nephews too.
But it's not cool.
June 2024 is even warmer than June 2023 by a substantial margin.
Copernicus, the climate monitoring service, warns we're on a precipitous road, now experiencing a full year of global temperatures rising at or above 1.5 degrees Celsius.
It doesn't mean that we have breached that limit set by the Paris Agreement, but it clearly shows that we are getting closer to this limit.
Las Vegas topped 48 degrees Sunday, shattering records as the heat wave baking 10% of Americans pushed into this week.
Make sure you're in the shade if you can be. Don't be walking out here because a lot of people can just fall out. Stay hydrated.
Volunteer veterans in Oklahoma installed air conditioners and fans for people at risk. In Seattle, a hardware store reported a run on fans.
I think I'm going to buy this.
Fires already threatening in California could grow as firefighters work under intense heat to try to control them. Scientists say the streak of record heat is propelled by emissions from burning fossil fuels and last year's El Nino weather pattern.
I like to make the analogy of a furnace. So your house isn't warmest when the furnace first comes on. When the El Nino begins to develop, it's warmest when the furnace has been running.
That furnace and the lack of a cooling effect at night is forecast to linger in the U.S. and Canada for much of the week. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Toronto.
And our science and climate specialist Darius Badavi is back with the BC-wide forecast and beyond, showing us, telling us how close or we're covered by that dome, right?
Yes.
In some ways?
Yes, that's right. So we're getting sort of the north end of that, so not nearly as bad as California is getting it. And I know the term heat dome is quite charged, and rightfully so here in BC. So I'm using the term heat wave, but by the technical definition, you know, dome of basically dome of high pressure, pushing all that hot air down. That's what we're seeing, and we're going to continue seeing, especially here in the south of BC, for a while yet. And that has some serious side effects, as we know. If you just take a look at the fire danger as it was exactly 1 week ago versus where it's at now, we're seeing some major jumping off, and you can see a little bit of still pockets of yellow or moderate fire danger in the south. I think those will be gone by tomorrow, if not by Wednesday, almost certainly. And of course, where there's fire, there is smoke. In parts of the northeast, already seeing lots of that smoke, as we talked about before. A lot of that air pollution, majorly affecting some of those areas with air quality worse than some of the areas that parts of the world that we traditionally think of as having the worst air quality. So very serious conditions up there. And actually, if we take a look at some of those air quality warnings, first look at precipitation, because there's no relief in sight for the fires. Maybe the northwest getting a little bit of precipitation later this week, but again, not very much at all. In terms of those warnings, you can see here, again, we've talked a lot about the heat warnings, but air quality advisory for the entire northeast, given all that wildfire smoke. Going to be watching that over the next few days. I don't expect that to lift, given the atmospheric conditions sort of locking in a lot of that smoke. And down here, we have a smog advisory, not wildfire smoke, but a similar, the sort of lid on the atmosphere also doesn't help conditions there. So something else to watch out for. Now, again, we've take a look at the highs before, but I think that is the big weather story. So just going to run through them one more time. Lots of highs. And again, even though we're going to start to cool down a little bit as we get into midweek and end of this week, it's really just the north that gets that severe or that major drop in temperatures, 10 degrees or so in some places. Here in the south, temperatures still remaining in those mid to high 30s. So major news there. And again, nothing but sunshine across the province tomorrow. Maybe we start to see some showers as we get into overnight Tuesday into Wednesday up in the northwest. But generally speaking, Dan, this is the forecast everywhere, and this is what we've got for a while.
Okay. Now, it is Monday, so would you lead us in a deep breath?
Yes.
There we are. Maybe it'll be okay Monday. You're here with some good news about an animal, the Iberian lynx?
Yes, one of the most endangered animals in the world, or at least it was 2 decades ago. And we had only around 60 known individuals. Since then, the population of mature individuals has increased more than tenfold. Now we're at 648 individuals. You can take a look here at some of those cubs. If we include the immature individuals, like these little guys and gals, these little critters, critters isn't very fair, these animals, then we get up to almost 2,000 individuals. And this is largely because of supporting their prey, the endangered European rabbit, as well as habitat protection, just reducing interactions with humans. And it's a really a testament to what can happen when we take this sustained conservation action, Dan.
Nicely done, Doris. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Landing a big gig at 17. Coming up, we meet a teen flute and piccolo player who's making waves in classical music. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC returns as a media partner of the Surrey Fusion Festival, July 20th to the 21st. The festival features over 50 cultural pavilions that will incorporate the theme of landmarks of the world into their displays. For more information, visit surreyfusionfestival.ca. and never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter and keep connected with us.
Becoming a musician in an orchestra requires ambition and years of hard work and discipline. And for a teen flute and piccolo player, that dream is now a reality here.
The Vancouver Symphony Orchestra says having such a young member is unprecedented. Edsy Lovren caught up with the young musician as he got set to debut this past weekend.
Julin Chung is getting ready to take the stage at Vancouver Symphony Orchestra performance Saturday. The Philadelphia teen started playing flute at just 6 years old and has always dreamed of being part of a professional orchestra.
We were just gobsmacked, and now we have a 17-year-old who has won a seat in our orchestra.
Last month, the VSO held international auditions, hoping to find the right player and sound to fill a spot in their flute section. The CEO says she was shocked when the curtain was pulled back.
It's a blind audition, so you don't know who's behind the shield. And the shield went up and opened up, and the first thing he said is, "But I'm not finished high school yet."
Chung says applying for the VSO was his first professional audition, and having the chance to play music by well-known composers he grew up listening to was almost sacred.
It was really, really insightful to prepare for it. It's almost like time traveling back into seeing what these people so long ago, like what their emotions were, what they wanted to say.
The young musician plays the piccolo as well. Chung's past music teacher, who introduced him to the instrument, says as a player, he's the whole package.
He could play all the technical stuff, had a beautiful sound, but he also felt the music.
She says Chung was a quick learner, one of the many reasons he stood out as a student.
To have that amount of maturity in his playing, and so that was evident at an early age.
According to Canada Council for the Arts, there's only 47 symphony orchestras in the country. Zart Dan EB says the competition is stiff, with hundreds of applicants every time a spot opens.
People take, 10, 15, even 20 auditions before winning jobs. So to win your first one is extremely rare.
Chung says he's looking forward to joining the VSO and relocating to Vancouver with his parents.
We really like the city, the food's amazing, the nature's amazing, and I'm really excited to call this place home.
He is destined for greatness, and this Vancouver is, really lucky to have him.
Chung's first performance with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra will be Under the Stars at Sunset Beach. Edsy Lovren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Very impressive.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
Michelle Gassoub will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National, so please join her then. Good night.